Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. Today in the co-captain's chairs, we got from in the Prague seat, Chuck Alvarez, my fellow New Yorker, then all the way from the UK, drummer extraordinaire from Rain and Quill, formerly of Robert Plant and IQ and Frost, Mr. Andy Edwards. What's going on, gentlemen?
I'll see you, Pete.
Good afternoon.
So happy to have you both on this another fusion extravaganza. So today we are going to be ranking our top 5 albums from keyboard and piano legend. I mean, this guy is a legend, Herbie Hancock. He's got 1 million albums, so we decided to do a top 5. And as I was just rattling off before we pressed the record button on this thing, he's got like a bunch of different eras in his history, and where he's moved into kind of like different things, different music styles, all of it really good. So it was kind of really tough doing this ranking for me anyway, because I'm like, all right, well, I could pick 5 easy from the fusion funk era. I could easily pick 5 from the straight like kind of post-bop, the 60s era. Then you've got, the film score stuff. And I mean, there's all this, the Mwandishi era. There's just all this great music and so much to choose from. So I had a really hard time with this. Ultimately, I said, all right, I'm going to kind of dip a couple feet in a couple of the camps here, but ultimately, you got to pick the ones that are your favorites, right? So that's what it comes down to. So yeah, good luck, everybody here. I'm very anxious to see what you guys have come up with. So Andy, why don't you kick us off, then Chuck, then myself, and we'll go around till we get back to number 1.
Well, Pete, and Chuck, I had the same issue you did. One of the things I did was that there's so many great straight jazz albums. I mean, hundreds of straight jazz albums, including all the 60s post-bop albums. So I decided to have one album that sort of represented that. But I think for me with Herbie, I find him most interesting when he's interfacing with technology. He seems to have been right at the cutting edge. So this album, I was surprised I ended up putting this one in, but I felt I had to. So at number 5, I've got Future Shock with Rockets. I think culturally, Rockets got to be his most famous moment, to the general public. It's a really important tune that changed the face of 80s music, changed hip hop and all that sort of stuff. I'm a huge Bill Laswell fan, and this is really a Material album, a Bill Laswell Material album. When you look at the lineup, it's the same people that would have been on the Material albums, and I love those albums. The sort of Secret Life and One Down, they're really incredible stuff. So I thought I should represent that, and Herbie Hancock's work with Laswell. I've actually got another one coming up, but yeah. So I put that in, and I like this album and the albums that came in afterwards. You know me, Pete, with 80s fusion. I'm not so keen sometimes, but this goes so far into the programming that I do like what he's doing here, and I liked the one that came afterwards. What was that? Metal, yeah. And then there's one. Perfect Machine that came. I really like that album, So yeah, I think it's a great album. Whether it's jazz or fusion, I think it's so far away. But I think he changed the music scene with this. So I had to put it at number 5. Yeah, there you go.
Very good.
That's a very good album. Yeah, Rocket, which I remember when the video came out, was very groundbreaking for its time. I remember people who had never heard of Herbie Hancock via his jazz outlet. They just looked at him like, wow, oh my goodness, who's this guy? And they're like, man, this guy's been playing jazz for like 30 years prior.
Yep.
Wasn't he the first black artist on MTV? And the reason for that is because the video, he was only featured on the television. And so it's so groundbreaking.
Yes.
Such a groundbreaking album. And I thought I couldn't just, I know I'm a heavy fusion and jazz fan, and I thought, no, it's got to be on my list. So yeah, and it is a really good album, and because he just goes for it flat. He really does go for the technology, and it's actually groundbreaking. I can remember hearing that track on the radio for the first time, and it just sounded like the future. It's like, what is this? And of course, all the hip hop artists, then they just moved over to that sound. So yeah, really important album.
Yeah,
excellent pick. I like that.
Thanks, Chuck.
All right, gentlemen. My number 5 is his album Sextant. What's the Sextant from his Mwandishi era. Just one of those fabulous albums by him. Once again, with Paul Gleason and the band members that he had here, just jazz, funk, fusion. Just a brilliant album. If you've ever heard this album, Rain Dances, three songs, and this is around the period where he was putting like 3 or 4 songs on each album. And during this era, there are no bad tracks on here. Hornets, the nearly 20 minutes of jazz funk fusion, sometimes even space rocking, Hidden Shadows, and Rain Dance. Once again, my number 5 is Herbie Hancock's Sextant.
It's almost like that Mwandishi period was all recorded in one session.
Yes,
right? All those albums, these long, epic, jammy tracks, and it's like they locked themselves away in the studio for 3 hours and just like it's so hard to separate those albums.
Mm-hmm.
Really, they're so excellent. And I love your analogy using space rock, because I get a lot of that on a lot of those tunes in that little era from him and the rest of the band. Yeah, it's great stuff. Great choice. Let's see. Well, I'm going to go back to 1964 for my number 5 pick, because he had a couple albums right around that time that I just absolutely love, and I had to include at least one of them. Empyrean Isles.
Oh, beautiful.
I love this era also, Miles Davis. So basically what you have here, this is Herbie and Freddie Hubbard, who basically takes Miles's place here. You got Ron Carter and Tony Williams, right? So it's very Miles-ish from that period. This is recorded at Blue Note Records, produced by Alfred Lyon. Tremendous stuff. Really classy, like that whole kind of post-bop thing. This is, firmly rooted in the mid-60s, but that's a magical time for jazz, I think. You've got One Finger Snap.
Mm-hmm.
Features some just frantic Freddie Hubbard, just great playing on there. You got Herbie is just acrobatic on the keyboards. You got Tony Williams just blasting away underneath. Fantastic track. You've got the great, majestic Aliloquy Valley. Cantaloupe Island is considered by many an absolute jazz classic, almost like a standard, right? Killer melody, great trumpet from Hubbard. And then you got the wild 14-minute The Egg, which is just, absolutely spectacular. Just such a great album. One of the great jazz albums from the 60s. And I would say if you're a fan of Miles Davis, this period, and you don't have this, you got to get it. It kind of slots in right alongside it. So Empyrean Island's my number 5.
Yeah, I love those albums as much, if not more, than the Miles albums. I think definitely there's a case that there's more jazz standards on the Herbie 60s albums, if you think like Maiden Voyage, Cantaloupe Island, than there is on the Miles albums. I think that you have to take them in the same bracket, don't you? Those Miles albums, they're so heavy. It's not like and Herbie did some albums, they're really heavy. Some of the most important jazz albums of the 60s, really, aren't they?
I'd say that the Miles albums perhaps have a little bit more kind of go for it type of ensemble playing, whereas I think the songwriting on these are better on the Herbie. Right? There's really tight melodic songwriting on these couple of Herbie Hancock albums from this time period, whereas the Miles band were trying, they were just going for the jugular, and there's great things on both, obviously. But this is just, each track is so memorable. The same thing on Maiden Voyage. It's like, this is beautiful music.
Love it. That's an excellent album. All well done. This 60s stuff, I don't think there's anything bad there.
No.
Not at
all. All right, Andy, back to you.
Well, when I was looking, Herbie Hancock's, he's made 4 albums in the last 20 years. He hasn't released an album since 2010, which I thought was quite interesting. Of the 4 albums he's released, there's been ones that sort of, I think it was a Beatles or John Lennon type. I'm not too sure, but it looked like where he was doing someone else's tunes, and he's done that Joni Mitchell album, which I think is great. But this is this is not recent. This is 20 years ago, but this one here again. I think this is the last time he really took on sort of modern technology, modern music, and I absolutely love this album. He's really it's sort of around about 2001. He's got like hip hop influences, drum and bass, electronica. It's also got quite a strong spiritual sort of Buddhism thing about it. He's using the technology absolutely incredible. Again, it's produced by Bill Laswell. Doesn't sound like a usual Laswell production, but yeah, I really love this album. I think it's when I really love Herbie is when he's pushing the technology and really taking on. He says there's some jazz artists that will listen to what's happening in outside jazz and they'll try and copy it. With Herbie, I feel he takes it and he actually pushes it further out. He's done this so many times where he's then become a leader in that style. And I think this is probably the last time he did that. Really interesting album.
That Miles quintet, which they were very much into the music scene of the 60s. I remember Tony Williams said that he wanted to play with Jimi Hendrix as well as Miles Davis. Ron Carter was mainly the more jazz rock guy. The jazz guy. Like, it took him a while to come into the jazz fusion era, but everyone else, Wayne Shorter was into the Grateful Dead. A lot of these guys loved listening to the music of that time. He also liked listening to the band and Bob Dylan. And you've seen it with that time, how Miles Davis's music of that time just started to just branch out. And when they went to Dave Holland and Chick Corea, that's when they really started to become more jazz fusionish. That's actually a pretty good album as well. I've heard it quite a few times. I don't own it, but it's a very good album. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he does a really good job with all these sort of contemporary sounds on there. These guys they're really incredible, really, because if you look at like Joe Zawinul, Wayne Shorter, John McGoughlin, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, these all start in basically they're sort of bebop jazz guys, and you look at all those black and white videos and they got the suits on and they're playing in a quintet. Mm. And then 10 years later, they're all doing, Herbie Hancock's making Rocket, and McGoughlin's doing like Mahavishnu Orchestra and Chick Corea's doing Return. They've got their influences, but God, how did they go from that to that? Right. There's very few musicians that go from, that far out. Mm-hmm. And there's loads of good jazz guys around now, but I often say this, I say, listen to what they're doing. I can pull out albums from 40 years ago that sound the same. Mm-hmm. Whereas, Herbie Hancock, on these albums sounds nothing like albums 20 years before. They were just pioneers, and I don't know what was going on, and that's why I think with Herbie, there's loads of great, like in the 70s, he went back with VSOP, and I love all those albums. And then he did that quintet with Wynton Marsalis, and his top is some of the best acoustic jazz playing you'll ever hear. But I really wanted to represent the technological thing because I think that's when he's really is most interesting. And yeah, that album's really, if you haven't heard it, it's really great album. It's got real playing on it as well, and they're really playing on it. So yeah, I think it's got Chaka Khan on, some vocal tracks, some way out tracks, ambient electronic tracks. Yeah, really interesting album.
Oh man,
future, yeah, that's the one.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andy. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I've managed to stick within the jazz, rock, funk fusion era. My fourth pick for this time will be his Headhunters album, perhaps his most famous album and one of the most. I think it's one of the best-selling jazz albums of all time within the top 10. It's just 4 standards on here. Everyone knows of Watermelon Man from the 60s version, the straight up jazz version, but then this version comes out and it brings in a whole new different legion of followers. Just one amazing album, 4 phenomenal tracks that you just can't. It's hard to bypass. It's perhaps his best album of the 70s. It's a great album, but there are 3 more albums that I within that era that I find more capitalizing than I do this one, as great as it is. So my 4th pick is Herbie Hancock's Headhunters. My 4. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point there. That album for me is always the album that I recommend to someone who has never listened to Herbie Hancock before.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because I think it pulls together the 60s, the more straight jazz stuff, as well as a little bit of that avant-garde stuff from the Mwandishi period. and as well as the straight jazz fusion and the funk, right? And like Andy said, all the technology, because right at that point he is fully embracing everything that's coming out. I agree with you. I think there are better albums, but it's definitely up in it's a top 5 album no matter how you look at it, right? Yeah, good choice. All right, my number 4. You know what? When I was putting this list together, I had no idea. I did not think that this was going to make my top 5. And then the more I listened to it, the more I realized how much I really love this album. And this is the album for me where he fully embraced all of the funk stuff. And I'm talking about 1975's Man-Child.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Man, this is a monster funk album.
Yep.
Vocals, instrumental funk album. It does not get much better than this. I mean, Jesus, the bass on this album is out of control. He's utilizing, you got Fender Rhodes on here. You got, all the different synths and everything. And just like these songs are just so bottom heavy, and the keyboards are just so cutting edge. I mean, your hang-ups, never-ending groove. I love that you got guitar on this album, right? Because not a lot of guitar in any of these early albums, right? If any at all. You got these killer guitar licks and the bass and the horns, right? You got stepping in it, which is just absolutely amazing. You got that soothing Fender Rhodes. I mean, I personally love Herbie Hancock on the Fender Rhodes. I think that's, like, for me, if I'm going to hear him play anything, he could play that all day, and I'm perfectly happy for it. Sun Touch features the Rhodes in a big way. The Trader is just got this bubbling groove in the bass lines. Man, Bubbles, another breezy, jazzy tune. Man, this album is just so much fun. This is the album you put on, you just get up and you can't stop moving around. And I love it. And, as much as I think that Headhunters has a lot of appeal to more like mainstreamy type people, I think a lot of like people who don't really think they like jazz, if they heard this, they would love the funk aspect of it. And I think this is a really accessible album with just some killer playing on it.
Great album.
Yeah, I absolutely love that album. There were certain albums I thought, well, often when you do these, we all pick the same albums, but I knew because that could be in my top 5, so easily. Man-Child's one of my favorite albums of all time, and I have to think with Herbie, I can't think of that. You got Parliament Funkadelic, James Brown, you got Earth, Wind and Fire, all those. I love all those bands, but no one's funkier than Herbie. When Herbie's at the full funk, there's nothing funkier, and that album has got to be one of the funkiest albums ever made. That's it.
What's you could play that on an R&B station over here, and people wouldn't even know the difference over here.
Yeah,
what an album, Oh man.
Yeah, like I said, when I was getting ready to put this list together, I had the ones that I thought would be easy top 5s, and then I started listening to a bunch of others, and I'm like, how can I not have Man-Child on this list? I'm like, sorry this, sorry that. Man-Child was coming here.
That's how I was too. I was like,
right?
You pulled it. I was like, oh shit.
Yep. Crazy. So many good albums here. All right, Andy, back to you.
Yeah, and the thing is you mentioned there's unlike a lot of the other fusion guys, there's not much guitar on Herbie's albums, is there? Whereas that album's got guitar on. It's Wah Wah Watson, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's so funky guitar playing. It's got to be some of the funkiest guitar playing ever. And I think that it does give it a little bit of an edge over the Headhunters. Anyway, at number 3, I wanted to put him playing a more straight jazz, swinging jazz, and so I put this one in.
Oh, well, I saw him on tour for that album. I love that album.
It's a phenomenal album, and he's made so many great jazz albums with great lineups, but the fact that this is all sort of pop and rock tunes, he's reworked, and he reworks them so well. I mean, he does a version of All Apologies by Nirvana.
A very well done version.
And you don't go, oh, that's clever, he's done a Nirvana. It's not like that. They're reworked in a way where they really stand up. And then the lineup: Herbie Hancock, Michael Brecker, John Scofield, David Holland, Jack DeJohnette, Don Elias. It's just incredible, and they're all playing. Scofield and Brecker, all of them are just playing at the top of their game. And so, yeah, I really do love this album. One of my favorite Herbie Hancock albums. So that's why it's at number 3, and very interesting as well. Sometimes you're listening to it and you're thinking, well, this isn't a pop tune, is it? That and then you check it out and you realize they've done it so cleverly. It's got Prince tunes on here, Paul Simon, Steely Dan, so yeah, I love that album.
Chuck, when you saw that live, did they have the same lineup?
Oh, yes, they did. Think about a couple of players on there that are deceased now. The great Michael Brecker, man. Oh, he was killer, man. He was just awesome. That's the only time I ever saw him live. I've never seen him live before that, I didn't live long after that, but yeah, which it was a pretty good. That was a pretty good album. So they played a lot of standards on there, including a few songs from that tour as well.
Cool.
All right, gentlemen. My number 3 is another one from his jazz funk fusion, the album Thrust. Another one of these great albums that featured like these long out jams, 9, 10, 15 minutes long. And once again, he just doesn't disappoint on this album. He just plays his ass off, and the band, man, the guys that he had playing with him, I would have loved to have seen this band live during this time. Oh man, just the sad fact that I was just way too young to have seen him during that time. So my number 3 is Herbie Hancock's Thrust.
That's like his Rick Wakeman period almost,
Yes.
You just imagine the racks of keyboards that he had surrounding him on that tour.
Oh man.
Possibly more about that in a couple minutes. So my number 3 is Headhunters. It had to be on here. I echo everything that Chuck already said. The Breakthrough album. This is really where that whole funk fusion style really came into prominence for him for a number of years. He's playing Fender Rhodes, clavinet, ARP Odyssey, and soloist. He's starting to utilize everything that's available to him. You got Bernie Maupin on sax and flute, Paul Jackson on bass, Harvey Mason on drums, Bill Summers on every kind of percussion in the kitchen sink and all that kind of stuff. Chameleon is so catchy, so classic. You got Watermelon Man on here. You got Slide, Vein Melter. I mean, just the rhythms are just tearing it up on this album. There's just so much groove, but it's very spacey too. It's really cool how you have an album that really is so accessible and catchy, yet it's atmospheric and spacey and funky and fusion all at the same time. I mean, you may like other albums better, but I think this is the album from 73, still pretty early, but right in the middle of the fusion era where he's just putting everything together and he gives you everything that is Herbie Hancock up to that point all together on one album and just basically launched him into another direction. So it's a classic for a reason. Classic album cover too. Love it. Produced impeccably also, I might say.
Oh yeah, sounds great. Remastering would just destroy it. I would hope that they would never go to that extreme, where they would compress it so much that that you'll just hate the album afterwards.
Yeah, it's awesome. Great stuff. All right, Andy, number 2.
At number 2, I have, like Chuck, Sextant. And I think this is one of the greatest jazz albums ever made.
Ever.
Really is. I think the Mwandishi band is, doesn't get talked about enough. Hang on. Sorry.
Uh-oh. I thought it would be me first.
Yeah, I've had no barking dogs for 25 minutes. That's pretty good, right? So.
Well, it's funny. As far as I was thinking that my wife or my mother-in-law would come running on us.
I think my wife's she's just hurt a finger or something like that. So it's not the note. I told her not to disturb me. She says I've hurt my finger, but I'm going to ignore it anyway. So yeah, Sextant. I think the Mwandishi band, really incredible band, but they're just so heavy, aren't they? I think he had problems, commercially actually getting that band off the ground. I felt that all 3 albums are amazing and they get better and better. At this point, he's really exploring interesting areas because it is like space rock. It is almost like Can or some European krautrock, but it's also the funk starting to creep in on this one as well, and you can hear echoes of the Headhunters band as well. So I I don't know what to say, especially the Hidden Shadows.
Oh, I love that song.
It's in 19, it's got that riff in 19, and the stuff that's going on there. And Herbie's really good at orchestrating that type of stuff. It doesn't just sound like a jam. I mean, it's 10 minutes long, but there's themes coming in and out, and he seems to orchestrate it. And some of the sounds he's pulling out at the time, yeah. So I really love this. I think there's a whole bunch of I see them as sort of post Bitches Brew albums. You know, like the early Weather Report and Zawinul's solo album, I'd put in that bracket. You know, some of the Miroslav Vitous albums I'd put in that, and I think the greatest of them is this. You know, it's space rock. It really is. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely love that.
Yeah, that era is. I mean, you said it perfectly. That era is basically taking the Bitches Brew era Miles Davis band to the next level. That's basically what it is. So for those folks who are watching who maybe haven't explored the Herbie catalog and love, you know, Jack Johnson or Bitches Brew, these albums are for you. I mean, it literally takes that, and like you mentioned, the space rock thing, and it's the music's out there, but it's so amazing. So amazing. All right, Chuck, number 2, what do you got?
Oh man, you're great. Mwandishi. You know, what's that? Asinato. You know, when you get there, and Wandering Spirit. 3 songs, just 3 songs.
That's it.
Yeah. 3 songs. But what's that? This is him at probably had his most cosmic. You know, this album, just as I'm reiterating, as you both were just saying, is that this is like a continuation of Miles Davis's Bitches Brew, but more funkier, if you can call space rock funkier. And it seems to have like a Canish type of psychedelia krautrock type of theme, and so I don't know if he was going for that or he just wanted to do it on his own. But you know, just him embracing the technology of the time, the Moog synthesizers, the ARP. You know, once again him with the Fender Rose. You know, an amazing album. You know, Wandering Spirit song. You know, all these songs. You know, you hear these songs and you feel like you're in the middle of Oasis out in Africa, just looking at the stars. Man, beautiful album.
Yep. African space funk.
Yes.
Right.
What's it? So yep.
It's my number 2 as well. I had a really hard time with these couple of albums from this period because they're all 3 of them are so amazing. And but this is just fantastic. And you know, I think the MVP of this album is Eddie Henderson.
Yes.
I mean, man, trumpet and flugelhorn. He's like every track. He's kind of like bleating and roaring and squonking, and he's just there every step of the way. And how about those cool wah-wah guitar licks from Ronnie Montrose on Ostinato, right? Who nobody gives any credit to. Yeah, he's not soloing, but he's there.
But he's there.
Yeah, and rhythms on this album, and this is just great stuff. Epic compositions. It's jammy, but it doesn't go out, you know, too far into Jamville. And you got some free jazz on here. It's like some nice melodies too. I mean, this is just Wandering Spirit song, 21 minutes and change, and it doesn't feel like it at all.
Not at all.
Yeah, this is just a great album. And like I said, I had a hard time because I had Sextant in my original top 5, and there's another one too. And I'm like, which, you know, it's hard. These are all really, really good albums. So that's my number 2.
I think Ostinato is the finest moment.
Yeah,
it is one of my top Herbie Hancock tracks. You know,
top 5.
Yeah, it's just incredible, and there's nothing else like it. You know, yeah, there's some European prog that's a little bit like it, but it's not as funky, and it hasn't got that sort of voodoo-y African madness going on there. You know, and you know, if you look at sort of some of the stuff Miles was doing at the same time, it's not quite as spacey with the electronics. You know, Herbie's going further out in the electronic. It really sits on its own, you know, and there's a couple of tracks. And the other thing with the Mwandishi band, all the tracks are really different as well. So if you hear Ostinato and then go to the next one, like Wandering Spirit, it's completely different, you know. And I think it's such a shame. I think what happened was Bitches Brew sold so much that the record companies started to, there was a short period where the record companies would market albums that were actually really, really difficult, you know. So you've got major labels putting out, you know, like the first Weather Report album, which are obviously being marketed as a hippies, as a sort of, you know, sort of, you know, like Grateful Dead drug experience, you know. I think,
of course, that audience could totally get into African voodoo madness, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
You have this little window where musicians were really able to be creative.
Yeah.
I mean, people like John Coltrane, some of the latter John Coltrane albums are so difficult, and yet I think the period, you know, these sort of hippies were just tuning in and dropping out to these albums. But I think with Mwandishi Band, it ran out, and I think Herbie had to sort of sit back and think, you know, what can I do? And didn't he do a tour with the Pointer Sisters? You know, where he decided that, you know, he had to get more commercial. I think Chick Corea did it as well, you know, with his Circle and going to Return to Forever, you know. And so the album that follows that Mwandishi Band is my number one, which is this one. Yeah, I just I really love this album, and I think too many people judge it on Chameleon. Even Chameleon, the back half of Chameleon is completely unlike what you expect. You know, it's sort of, you get the single version, and then Chameleon, you know, the second half kicks in and the band goes wild. You know, I think Watermelon Man, that hook, that's just amazing. You know, but Sly is heavy jazz.
Love it.
They're flying. They're flying on this. And I really do like Thrust and the later albums, but it's Harvey Mason. I'm a drummer. Harvey Mason's just, the way he's playing, he's so light and effortless, but he's flying on it. You know, I think, like we said, Paul Jackson is my favorite bass for all time. I think he died quite recently.
Yeah, just recently.
Yeah, but he is really my favorite bass player. And all the other funk bass players like Bootsy Collins, you know, Larry Graham, you know, you can get what they do, but you listen to some of the bass lines on here, and he's up at the top of the neck, and it's all sort of this. I do think this is one of the great jazz albums. I know it's a real big seller and it's really popular, but I absolutely love this. And if I had to have one Herbie Hancock album and only one, it would be that one. Yeah, so that's my number one.
Just a special album, and there's a reason why it's that special album that everyone tends to go for. It's a great album. You know, it's an album that my wife, who doesn't really like anything I listen to, even she would like. You know,
but I nearly swapped this one out. You know, which meant it wouldn't have been in my list, and I was so close to swapping it out for Flood. Off the live double album by the Headhunters Band, which seems to take the Mwandishi Band and the Headhunters Band put all together. That the music on Flood's wild, absolutely wild.
So well done. It's a accumulation of everything that he's done to that point. You know,
yeah.
What's it? You know, there's the early period, the '60s era, and then it just goes straight out into the '70s era. Well, I love that album. That's another album.
So I've done a bit of a cheat, and I've mentioned that. You know, that could easily be my number one, but I'll plump for Headhunters. Yeah, that album.
Excellent. Well, my number one is Crossings. Just my opinion, and so excluding anything that he did during the '60s, because you know that's his hard bop era, and some of his post bop. Forgive me. I think this is his finest hour, which as a musician, as a composer, and as a band leader, which are just one of the most amazing albums of jazz albums that's ever been done during the '70s. Crossings, just 3 amazing songs, and probably I would say that if probably almost just as cosmic as anything that he's done beforehand, but just very just eclectically spiritual at times. You know, Water Torture, Sleeping Giant, you know, that the suites, you know, just one suite after another suite. You know, he could have easily have chopped all these songs up and just issued them as a single. You know, just an amazing album. One of my favorites, and perhaps my favorite of his from the '70s, Crossings.
And one of my favorite jazz covers from the '70s as well. I love the cover of that album.
It's great. Such a beautiful album cover.
Yeah, incredible. album cover there.
And for all the prog fans watching, there's tons of Mellotron on the album. So there you go.
Oh man, yep, exactly. Of the Sweets itself, you know.
Yep. That is definitely one of his albums for the prog fans, I think.
Yes.
All right, my number one, I had to go with Thrust. I love this album. I love the album cover art. This is just so cool. As Chuck says, it's so cosmic. This is a funk fusion classic. This is the album that followed up Headhunters. Kind of difficult to do, but it works. Again, you got Bernie Maupin, Paul Jackson, Mike Clark on drums on this album, and Bill Summers on percussion. Palm Grease. What a great just kick-ass funk affair that is. I mean, it's just so great. That could be like the soundtrack to any of those like real gritty like 70s New York City crime thriller films, right? I mean, Chuck knows exactly what I'm talking about. You know, all those
42nd Street.
Every 70s like film that was done in New York City, and you show Times Square, and it's like it always has music like this. This would have been a perfect soundtrack for that. I mean, you got Fender Rhodes and clavinet and all these synths and sax and the bass. I mean, Andy, you're absolutely right. Paul Jackson was the man. I mean,
oh man,
like the hidden MVP of all these albums from this era. So many great songs on here. You know, Butterfly is great. You know, Spank a Lee. Actual Proof is terrific. Again, most of this era, you only get maybe 3 or 4 songs on most of them, but that's all you need. Just an absolutely cooking album with some great playing, great grooves. If you love fusion, if you love funk, this is the best meeting of the two. And you know what? I've talked a lot on the channel lately about like albums that kind of go together. And this are like they're brother and sister. Gotta have them both together. And you know what? And it's the same thing with the Mwandishi era, although you got 3 of them. But I think if you have never really listened to any Herbie from this time period, just go out and get these 2. It's a great start. And from there, you're going to want to explore everything else we've talked about.
The great thing about these albums is they're so commercial. Because they got great hooks on. It's not because they're like easy listening. It's just he's writing such great hooks. But the reason why there's only a few tracks on there because he lets the band play.
Yes.
Which a lot of these fusion bands, when they did start to cross over, you get the feeling you'll buy an album and you'll think, well, yeah, it's okay, but they're not really soloing, and you get the feeling that live it would have been really cooking. But on the album version, you're not. But with these albums, they fly, you know. And another thing I'd like to say is that, you know, the albums that, you know, you get Man Child, then you get Sunlight, and then he goes into that disco period. This could be Herbie right now.
I'm sorry, guys.
It's okay. That happens to me all the time.
I don't feel so bad now.
My mother did that to me all week this week. It's like every time I was doing a taping, there she is trying to FaceTime me. I'm like, and then when I don't answer the FaceTime, she calls me on the phone.
Yeah.
You know how moms are, right? It's like, oh, if he doesn't answer, something's wrong. It's like, Ma, you know I tape like every night, right? So
oh man.
Yeah, no, it's all good points. I mean, he does let the musicians play. And I think that's I almost wish, and I know both of you guys are huge Weather Report fans. That's why I think some of those latter period Weather Report albums, I love them, don't get me wrong, but it's almost like you would have liked Joe to let everybody stretch out a little bit more. And then you hear the live recordings, you're like, all right, that's exactly what we're talking about. So whereas I think on a lot of these Herbie albums, it's like everybody's just doing their thing and it works, right? And it's still catchy.
That's the thing with Herbie. You know, Herbie, just like what you both have mentioned, is that he let the band play. You know, the sad thing about Joseph Zawinul being that he was such a big innovator as far as like the keyboards and synthesizers went, is that he still was pretty much rigidly a band leader. And when he led the band, you know, he just wanted to just make sure that, you know, that they played his songs into his liking. And that's why the band could never keep a drummer. You know, they're like, listen, you know, we want to drum, but come on, man, you know, we physically possibly can't play like that. And one of the things that he often complained about is that, you know, he was like, you know, everyone always said that I dominated the band, but he says, unlike Wayne Shorter, my only vehicle was was Weather Report. So that's the difference between him and everyone else. But getting back to Herbie, Herbie, what's it that unlike his peers, and so he was really much what's one of these guys that commercially fit fit the times as well. Even over all of his peers, and that's what I liked about him, because all these albums over here on the R&B stations, you would hear a couple of songs. Sometimes you would hear Chameleon. You would hear so many of these songs, playing late night R&B station. You're like, hey, that's Herbie Hancock. And so that's him right there. His 70s stuff. That's why I focused just on that right there.
Yep.
He seems to refine it as well. I think with Manchild, he brings it in a little bit, and then Sunlight he brings it in, and then towards the end of the 70s he does that Feet Don't Fail Me Now, and he's having hit records at that point, isn't he? He's having charts of records, Monster, and these are full-on disco records, but I still love those records. Some other future guys don't seem to do. I love those albums. I Thought It Was You with all the vocoder stuff on, and he's singing with the vocoder again. How many people had hit records doing that? How he got away with it. So he's really incredible musician. Yeah, I love it all. With one of the few fusion guys that doesn't matter how far he crosses over, because I think he really understood it. He understood pop music, and not every jazz guy does.
Well, it's an interesting topic, because we talked about it recently, Andy, about how guys like Stanley Clarke and Billy Cobham, who also tried to go that route, and yet we don't appreciate those albums as much as we do Herbie doing the exact same thing, right?
Because for those guys, we look at them as like, oh man, these guys are selling out, man. But with Herbie, he just gradually just went right into it. He, in my opinion, he was like the jazz version of Stevie Wonder. Who he's worked with quite a few times. But that's how I always figured him, just to be one of these guys that could just fit in with the times.
And maybe it's because he slowly incorporated all these different elements, instead of like you said, like a Stanley Clarke who does a burning fusion album one year, then the next album is all R&B with 5 vocal tracks, right? Where it's like so much of an about face.
Oh, it just doesn't work.
When we did the Stanley Clarke top 10, there was a Stanley Clarke album we discussed that came out around 1984. Was it Time Zone? Is it that what it's called? Or Future? I can't remember what it's called.
Future Shock?
Future Shock.
Time Exposure.
Yeah, and that he's gone, oh my God, look what Herbie's done with Future Shock. And he's tried to do the same thing. But the thing with Future Shock is Herbie had located the guys that cut net through Bill Laswell. He'd been able to locate the guys that are really at the cutting edge of that. And I think the same thing with the synths. Didn't he have like Patrick Gleason was helping him with the synths? I think he was very thoughtful in actually bringing the right players and the right people to go to work with, which meant that the albums were really, they had some authenticity to them. You feel like there's serious funk players, on these albums, and there's the disco's proper disco. I really rate him. I love funk. I'm a huge funk fan. But to me, he's at the top of the tree in terms of funk. Forget the jazz, he's the top of the tree for funk, and his influence on all those, the influence he had on people like Stevie Wonder. Because Stevie Wonder's like a pop artist that slowly goes fusion, doesn't he? He's moving the opposite way as Herbie, and I think he was using Herbie as an influence, so very influential musician, very important beyond jazz and fusion, really. I think he really cut into the mainstream so many times.
Yep.
And it works successfully.
Absolutely. You guys got any honorable mentions before we go?
Well, the honorable mention that I have was just a mention, Flood. Flood, just an amazing album. Just an amazing live album. At times, it could be quite cosmic, but then there are just times where him and the band just straight up cook, man. So that's my honorable mention, Flood, live album from 1975.
Cool. Andy?
Yeah, I think nearly made my number one. It would have been Flood. I quite like Fat Albert Rotunda, which is where the first time he really starts to mess with the fusion, and that's quite cute little album. I do like that album. There are so many Herbie Hancock albums that I absolutely love. The VSOP album, the solo album with Chick Corea. I had to sort of just go, yeah, just put that all aside, and just and I tried to bring it down because some of my favorite straight jazz albums are Herbie Hancock albums.
Yeah,
so,
that's absolutely true. I'm just bear with me, guys. I just wanted to pull out.
So for example, Maiden Voyage, Voyage is going to be one of the greatest jazz tunes ever made, and yet
the whole entire album,
and we haven't included it, and it's not because it's not great; it's because there's so much stuff there. But yeah, Maiden Voyage is, I would say, is one of the most important jazz tunes.
Yep, that's one of my honorables. Maiden Voyage is impeccable. Flood is also amazing. I love this album.
Brilliant.
That album, just fantastic. And Sextant was in my original top 5, as well as this bad boy was also in my top 5. So it's I had a lot of movers and shakers trying to put this together, but it's so many great albums, and there's a lot we haven't even touched on, obviously.
Oh yeah, sheesh, we can go on and on.
Yep, cool.
So when I went through all of mine, and I wish I brought it in now, I could have showed you. I found it, and I really like it. It's like an African album that he made with Don Cherry called Kawabi.
I forgot the name of that album.
Is it Kawabi or Kawad, something like that?
Something like that. Well, very similar, because I love Don Cherry. Anything with Ornette Coleman, I love. Anything that Don Cherry. I remember hearing that album at Tower Records one time. They were playing it over loudspeakers back in the late 80s, and I remember inquiring about it. Just a brilliant album, just a brilliant album, and it just tells you how much Herbie was willing to work with other musicians.
Exactly, and I thought I might make this on my honorable mention, but I looked on the internet and couldn't find anything about it at all. It was like I couldn't get he wasn't mentioned in his discography or Don Cherry's discography, so there are so many albums there. When you start to dig deep, he's done so much stuff. He's done stuff with like Last Exit, which is like industrial level free jazz, one of the most out there bands ever, and he sat there doing stuff like that. He goes from complete free avant-garde jazz right through to commercial pop in the charts, and there's very few artists like him. I rate him so highly. Yeah, I think if you're not aware of him, some of these albums you got to go and check out. They're just
most definitely
the greatest albums ever.
What I'll do is I'll also put a listing out there, and so when this is finally so if anyone wants to check them out, I'll have the listing on there as well.
Yep. We'll have all of our lists will be down in the comments section. So be on the lookout for that in case you want to go investigate any of these. And I hope that you do, right? So I want to thank Chuck and Andy for doing some homework and putting together these wonderful lists and talking about their knowledge and love for Mr. Herbie Hancock. And everybody watching, if you are a fan as well, please put your top 5 favorites or 10, however many you want to do, in the comments section below. And make sure you visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. So coming up. So Andy, what's going on with you? You've been doing some cool things on your YouTube channel as well. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've started to really try and focus in on the fusion stuff, 70s fusion, and I've got a few people over there now that have seem to be into the same sort of music. I'm really enjoying it. So I'm going to shoot some more videos. Tomorrow, I think I'm going to be looking at Vinnie Colaiuta tomorrow. Nice. Greatest drummer of all time, maybe.
What a great drummer. All the bands that he's played with, man. Oh, just an amazing drummer. Frank Zappa.
Yeah. Herbie.
Herbie.
He toured with Herbie. Incredible. Yeah. But I'm really involved in that. My band Rain, we're just working on a new video at the moment for a new record that's coming out. Which will be on a very special album connected with Rosfest. I won't say much more about it, but there's an album coming out. So we've been working on a one-off track for that, and we shot a video. Well, we haven't shot a video, but we've got this guy doing some computery video for us. So that's the thing we're working on today. Cool. It's mad. I'm getting asked to film stuff for this video, and I've just been doing it before I came on. I've got the camera here and I'm just acting things out. I don't know what they're going to do. I think it's computer graphics or something. So
Nice.
The modern world in which we live.
Look forward to that. And then Chuck, we've got the A team coming up in the Prague seat in what, a week and a half. You want to talk a little bit about that topic?
Oh man, well, I think we'll keep that a bit of a secret, and so because I know that we're gonna have a lot of fun doing that. I've already been talking to the guys about that, and what's Anthony himself is like, but I'm pretty much excited about this upcoming one. So I'm gonna keep that a little secret for now, and so and just let everyone just be prepared for the 18th on our show.
The 18 plus one. So we've got Mr. Stephen Reed joining us for that episode. So stay tuned for that, everybody. That's coming up a week from Tuesday. So thanks for watching this very cool Ranking the Album show, Herbie Hancock. And we'll see you all real soon here on the channel. For Chuck Alvarez and Andy Edwards, I am Pete Pardo. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Good weekend, guys.